Hello, everybody. Welcome to Everyone Else Has a Podcast with JD Swilly and Scott Asher. Today we have a special guest with us, Dan Scott. I normally am used to calling you Pastor Dan because, really, you still are a pastor in my life. And then I also worked under your leadership at Christ Church for a number of years. But that's not the only title that you could go by. There's all kinds of different titles that we could call you.
Yeah. Your Eminence.
Your Eminence,
See,
El Conquistador, Doctor. That's a legitimate one, right?
Yeah,
Well,
yeah, and that's all good. Dan also works.
Dan also works. Well, I'm so glad that you decided to come on to the podcast here with us today. You're one of the smartest people that I know, and so you've been doing these nightly talks on Facebook for a number of weeks now. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that and how that came about?
Well, the first night that the White House backed social distancing, and so we knew it was going to be a national thing, you could just sense the kind of the fear, like this must be a really big thing. And so I did a 12-minute thing, with a guitar, and I forget what, I sang some song that's very, very old and calming, and it's like, we'll be okay and get through it. Well, I don't know, I think 3,000 hits on it right away, like that night. So I'm like, wow.
Not too shabby.
No, I started getting a lot of emails asking me to do it each night. So I've been doing it each night. I'm not going to continue to do it every night, but some find a different rhythm than that. But while people were in their homes, I found out there was an awfully lot of people that were actually alone, like widows. My father is a widower, and he was in his home alone, so he watches every night. He's my dad, but there was a lot more too. And so, and also a lot of people who weren't Christians were tuning in.
Yeah.
Kind of just, I knew maybe they had been Christian, or they had, they'd given up on church, and but they were healthcare workers many times. So that was really moving to me. So that's kind of what was behind it.
Speaking of parents watching, Scott's mom is like our biggest fan.
oh yeah,
That's pretty good.
she's gonna make a comment right now.
Oh, good. Very cool.
Yeah, but we're up to like 30 or something. People have watched our videos,
Yeah.
so it's like almost the same.
Well, it grows,
Well, Pastor Dan has a much smarter strategy. He keeps them short, like 15 minutes, however long. I think the longest one I've seen was maybe 18. Maybe it's been longer than that, but
No.
we do an hour long deal. I don't know why
we
we
don't
do that.
Sing songs either.
They don't want us to sing songs. I'm
Also,
sure.
we don't come across as calming as Pastor Dan does. His is just very calming immediately. I was watching the comments, like, this is so calming and this is so great. And I'm like, I don't think we've ever heard that.
Well, you don't always want that.
well,
It's like,
good.
I fell asleep while you were talking, and
No.
I just watch you every night because it's,
It's like NPR.
We were talking about ASMR. There you go.
yeah.
There you go. Pastor Dan.
What has been one of your most highest rated topics, like with these videos that you're doing? When I say highest rated, I mean the most views.
One of them was on PTSD.
Okay.
So I had a lot of people that wrote me about that, actually across the English-speaking world, because, this has been a global pandemic. And I talked about the lasting effects. Even if you don't get ill, or none of your friends get ill, whatever side of the aisle you're on,
Right.
and I see the effects of it on social media, and when I calm down from some comments I see on Facebook, then I think they're traumatized, so I need to have some grace, and so that was one of the big ones.
Yeah, we were talking about that because we watched that as well. The thing that I took away from that, so I have notes on these, in preparation, and that was the one thing I was like, so the message from Pastor Dan on this PTSD thing is that people are going to snap at you. People are going to respond in unhealthy ways, and we need to have a lot of grace because it's probably that they're just going through this in a different way than you, or they're going through this and this is how it's impacting. So there needs to be a lot of grace in how we're I'm not saying it's okay for people to be rude or abusive or argumentative or whatever, but be aware that this is affecting a lot of people, and that's the way that it's going to come out.
Yeah, and when you deal with people who are traumatized, even if you were not traumatized, you can be traumatized by their abusive speech. Because I've been a long-term pastor in the area that I'm living, and I have to be awfully careful what I say because it matters if you hit somebody and you're on a bike, or if you're on a motorcycle, or you're in a Mack truck. So it's not just what happens and how you hit people, it's what you're driving when you hit people. And that's true too in the positions that you have in people's lives. So what I experience as a pastoral person and as a therapist working in the mental health field is I have to take things that other people justifiably would not have to take. And I have to find another way to deal with it, because if I strike back, the effects go really, really deep. So it's unfair, and I get angry about it, I get hurt about it, and then I have to find some way to deal with that. So we all have layers of having to deal with trauma and the traumatized.
And that's something I've observed from you over the years, and I appreciate that very much because you do. It's a respect for your calling that you have. Of understanding that, hey, what I might say about my personal opinion is about this thing, kind of may warp someone else's view on this spiritual matter or issue, and they may not. I may lose influence with them or something of that matter. And myself being a lead pastor also now, there's like a whole nother filter that I have, kind of like, I don't know if the Holy Spirit just installed it in me, downloaded it to me and hit install the moment I became a lead pastor. Maybe some lead pastors don't have that filter, but Scott and I have talked about that before. And just the conversation that we've had about, hey, I have to think through how I respond to things differently in the public than what I would just knee-jerk react to.
Sure.
And then you have the same issue yourself because you work in the corporate world, and so you have to tiptoe around things.
Yeah,
sometimes.
you have to. I mean, this is a little bit different in the corporate world, but you absolutely need to watch how you respond. You can't do Twitter exchanges at work, and or Facebook exchanges at work. It's just not going to cut it. But you do end up with a lot of hurt feelings, just the same, and then you're just kind of burying that because you can't bring it up, and so it leads to a lot of frustration. I guess the question I would have is, when you were saying that you're dealing with this, people are saying things, they're going to snap at you. There's a lot of stress, a heightened level of stress and fear out there. So now you're hurt. Now you've been hurt by something that someone said. How do you overcome that? What's the best way to do that? Because I don't know that someone realizing and apologizing is going to necessarily resolve it all the way.
Well,
So-
you realize there are people that you can care about and care for professionally or in ministry that you don't really have personal relationship with and won't. And one of the things that comes to mind, I don't know why, is before you all were born, I started to say Roosevelt, wasn't that far back. President Reagan was shot.
We were live.
Yeah, you
Yeah,
were
yeah.
alive.
We just we were young, but we
Right.
were live.
But I remember that he was shot, and the next day they told this story that they took the president into the operating room, and the doctor came to him and they said, "Mr. President, this is a great doctor. He's going to operate you for you." And so Reagan's on the bed and he looks up and he said, "Please God, tell me you're a Republican." The doctor laughed and said, "Today we're all going to be Republicans, Mr. President. You're in good hands." And everybody laughed. So we don't know if he was or was not. It sounded like he may not have been, but he wanted to know. So they were able to do that, and in that moment, to take care of something that needed taking care of without that stuff intruding. Today, that would be difficult because the doctor may have made some kind of fiery blast the day before, And had he done that, he probably wouldn't be asked to operate.
Yeah.
Because there'd be some fear, even legitimately, that if he makes a mistake or if the president wouldn't make it, then now people go back and read into it, well, he didn't want him to make it or whatever. And so we owe, if we're going to, there's some occupations we enter into that if we're going to do it, we have to realize we can share our personal opinions about political things, sometimes religious things, and we can be off script with a small circle of friends. We're not going to be able to do that in public. And if we can't bear up that and we can't find a way to do that, it's probably not a good profession for us to be in.
And that's the exact reason why we have our wives watch this podcast before we
do.
send it out to the world.
It's a true story. It's total. The first time, you know, you here it is, Scott and JD having conversations, and we had some conversations that, you know, probably would have alienated some of the people that we would like to talk to. And if you alienate part of your audience, what's the point? Like you're having a conversation for someone, right? Maybe it's for yourself, but in our group, we got a pastor, so we've got the church people. I've got my friends, you know, and if you aren't careful, and you know, and that goes to the thing too. There are certain topics that we won't talk about on this podcast because, you know, they may not be the right things for coworkers to hear you say. And so, you know what I mean? So you gotta be careful. So
Yeah, and I was just actually talking to your wife, JD, about this, that in mental health worker, as a mental health worker, you're talking to your colleagues, there's almost no subject you're not going to talk about. And, you know, you finally get like, you're talking about anything. So then I'm shifting from there to pastoral work, particularly when I became senior pastor at Christ Church. I'm coming out of mental health world, and also from Arizona, that's a lot more kind of blunt anyway.
Right.
And I'm realizing I'm shocking people by saying things, and I'm like, what? You know? So it's if you go to another country that speaks another language, you got to learn that language. So every field, every social level, every group you minister to has their own kind of dialect. And if you disdain that dialect, you just don't have any influence. So you can say the same thing, but you got to find the way that it is said in that environment.
That's so true. I grew up here in the South, in Middle Tennessee, and after high school was over, I went on to school in Texas. That's where I met my wife, who's from Iowa, so she's a Midwesterner. And while I was in Texas, was surrounded a lot by other people from around the nation and even the globe. I actually had a small little group of Australians that I was friends with, and then roommates that were from Arizona, roommates that were from California. And they're not like me, and that I would often make fun of the way I would say things and the things I would say. And then, so after that time period of school, I got married to my wife, and we moved to Missouri, and we served in a church in Missouri for 7 years, and it was about 2.5 hours away from where my wife grew up in Iowa. And so spent 7.5 years there in that culture, in the Midwestern culture, which is very blunt, like you say, that we just, you know, they just say it like it is. And the West is somewhat like that. And then I moved from there to Colorado, and it was very similar. There's some nuances there and the differences. But every time I would come home for a holiday, Thanksgiving, Christmas, some other thing, I was still kind of like in Midwestern culture mode, and it would get me in trouble.
Sure.
It would get me in trouble with my family because they thought I was being so offensive, and I wasn't trying to offend anybody, but I was just saying things like I thought that they were, or joking even. I would, even make jokes that would just get me in trouble.
Well, I have a good story about that. I grew up in a sect of Christianity that's very, very tight laced, and you don't say anything, gosh darn, any of that. And
crap, God forbid
no,
we say the word crap.
You don't think it. You don't say it.
You don't think
whatever.
it.
Should we list out all the other words right now, real quick, just to be really clear?
And I think we're supposed to infer they don't do it either. So,
Of course.
but anyway, one of the really wonderful preachers in that group was in Liberia, which is English speaking in Africa, and came back and laughed and told a few of us the stories. Like he had preached this sermon and everybody was weeping. They'd really moved by the sermon. And the pastor got up behind him and said, "Brothers and sisters, that was just a hell of a sermon. That's all I can say." And so he was just so shocked, and everybody was like, "Yeah, it really was," So it's hard, when you go from group to group like that, and you do travel in different countries or even different regions in this country, you begin to realize that it's about language and dialect, and because actually in the South we have ways of saying all those things, even as really strict Christians. But you have to say them like on the Whoopi Goldberg on Sister Act. She's in the nun outfit, so she says to the casino owner, she says, "Bless you." I'm like, okay.
Well, that's one of the things I've been thinking about recently is the in language versus the out language, and kind of like the mask that we put on a little bit sometimes, right? Like almost, we were talking about last week we were talking about that pastor who committed suicide,
Right.
and how he felt an incredible amount of constant judgment from the people at his church. The people that knew him, they kept, when he'd go to the store, people would say something to him, and it was just constant. And what was going through my mind was, they were really picking on him and his sin, but I'm thinking, every one of you have those kinds of sins, and
We just don't know them.
right, we just don't know him. And when it comes to language, if you were to kind of get someone by themselves, just you and them, crap, sucks, damn, whatever, that's going to come out. But if you put them in a church building, it's like we're afraid to say this because we've got to put on airs. We've got to pretend to be something that we're not. And it's almost like if we could just all be honest and say, we all have sins. We all have that crap. We all have a little bit of loose language. We all have, and stop pretending like we don't. And start accepting that everyone's going to be in that boat. We can maybe start to cut out some of that stuff, because I think it's the expectations of where you go is what you end up modifying. I'm going to put on my church face today. I'm going to put on my corporate face today. And I would love it if we could find a way to just put on my Scott face, and everyone be fine with that. That's JD, and that's Scott, and that's Dan. And obviously, I'm not saying everyone should be offensive. If you have an offensive face, maybe you need to modify that. But be authentic, be real, and be graceful.
I think that there's some decorum, just like when we go to a really nice restaurant and we dress a little better and we have candles and all. There are moments for decorum, as long as we don't pretend that's the way life always is, or even that's the way life ought to be, or that's better slice of life than others, because. If we can imagine some of the old movies we see of the family sitting around the table and everybody's dressed up, and if it's that way every night, you don't have any intimacy in your family. But there are moments to where it feels good, and the dignity lifts you. If you're invited to a state dinner somewhere or whatever, and you're hearing somebody it depends on the context, as long as we do not pretend that context is the only context we have.
Right. That's good. Earlier we were talking a little bit about PTSD, and then Scott just mentioned the pastor who unfortunately had committed suicide recently. And I don't know if you had heard about the story, Darren Patrick.
Yeah.
And so Darren, I didn't know Darren, but I know people who do know Darren, or did know him. And it's quite the tragic story. And one of the things that we've been seeing in church world since the pandemic began, however many weeks ago it's been, 8-9 weeks, depending on different parts of the country, maybe even 10, I guess, the people are reacting differently. It's causing, like people to recluse. It's causing different kinds of things. Margaret Phillips, who's my marriage counselor, you know her, she said kind of early into this process, within weeks, maybe 3 or 4 weeks into the process, she said, if in this last 3 or 4 weeks in this pandemic, if the issues in your marriage or whatever relationship that you're in close quarters with those people, if the major issues, unresolved issues, haven't come to the surface yet, they will. Just be prepared.
Sure.
And so that we saw that with Darren, unfortunately. We're seeing that with a lot of people. We're seeing in people in churches that have had things that they've not dealt with in their hearts and in their inner life, addictions, abuse, pain. We're seeing a rise of that. And so I've been having the conversation just within the last few days with other church leaders around the country and even in this area about as we re-enter into whatever normal life looks like again, as we're phasing back into that. We need to be prepared when we come to see people face to face, to walk with grace with them, to begin to not just be shocked because of some regression that they've had of an addiction or something like that. But there's this post-traumatic stress that we're dealing with, and
Well, I mean, you think pastors. I think pastors in the last 15, 20 years that I've pastored anyway, I would say the last 15 years especially, a lot of the fun went out of it. There's a lot of good people. Certainly the church that I pastored the last 15 years was people very kind to me. They've been wonderful to me. The person that succeeded me in ministry is a wonderful person. So board was good to me. It's not that. But there was always a constant group of the people that, you're supposed to be a great Bible expositor. They may not come to hear it, but they think you should be. You should be a great counselor, which that's my training, so I should be okay at it. You should be a great CEO, because for a lot of people, the church is basically a business, and so you've got to know how to do that well. You've got to be entertaining enough to keep people's attention in the pulpit.
it's just all like
It goes
Jesus.
on and on and
It's
on.
all like Jesus said in the New Testament. These are the things that pastors.
Yeah,
No,
and the thing is, and they're harsh about it.
yeah.
And you get the idea, once we turned our churches into business, and I would say that was a fault of the church growth movement, which I enthusiastically embraced. So I can say it was a mistake. And it's not that we didn't learn some things. We learned some critical things that are very important. But we modified church to become a business, and some have done very successful businesses with the church, but that modifies the church to be something that is different than what a lot of people expect a church to be. So they both expect it to be a super run business, and they expect it to be something like, a transcendent place where the curtain between heaven and earth is thin and you enter the presence of God in a transformative way, and you come out of there a different person. Well, you expect all those things together. The person that's supposed to make all that happen almost has to be God himself.
Right.
And so you try to do those things, and you try to do those things year after year, and you're seeing remarks of people now on social media, and they hurt, and you can't say anything back. And then you go into the church, and you're finally so guarded, you're getting very, very clever and very, very entertaining at saying nothing at all. Or you collapse. And this
Scott
is trauma
Scott could say
producing.
some things about that.
No, I mean, I agree. And finish your thought. And I didn't mean to cut you off. I was just.
I cut him off. Sorry.
That was my amen. That was my equivalent of amen right there. Because I agree. Those are your options, right? is so innocuous that you don't offend anybody, and everybody has a good time. They come, they're happy, they leave. I remember this kind of merges with the previous conversation about what you can talk about and what you can't. I know that this ministry, Abort 73, which is an abortion awareness ministry, and he wrote a book. The guy that runs this wrote a book, and he couldn't get pastors to let him speak at their churches. He couldn't get to conferences, nothing, because it was too divisive to talk about this topic. And so you have, like, on the one hand, you'll have people who will leave the church because they're not getting fed. And then when you try to feed them real meat, they're like, I don't want this. I want the sweet milk again, so to speak. And so you have this, can you do it the right way and attract those people? And it's tough, because I say those people because all of us are in different phases of our walk with God. And so all of us are those people sometimes. So it's not like there's a certain kind of bad Christian and a good Christian. Some of us are good Christians sometimes, and sometimes we do things right, and sometimes we do things wrong. But there are these expectations that are just outrageous. And
There's the Netflix thing on the two popes is absolutely marvelous.
Okay, I haven't seen that.
Oh gosh, it's great because it's, of course, the Roman Catholic world's its own kind of world, but there's a lot in there that's just pastors too, and so they're talking. It's between Pope Benedict and Francis before Francis becomes Pope. And Benedict's trying to get out, and he's trying to think that Francis probably is the guy. They don't like each other very much, and so it starts off rocky, and all the scripts taken from their different writings and their different sermons and so forth. So it's really, really well done. It's really researched well. And there's just moments of craziness that you have to be in ministry to know, yeah, that may have happened. So Benedict says to Francis in one of the deals, like, I don't know, I just don't have it anymore. I'm just going to have to hang it up, because he said, take for example, I was praying the other day and I lit a candle for my prayer and the smoke didn't go up. It went down. It was like Cain. My sacrifice is not accepted. So I'm like, all right. And he said, and I could just imagine somebody somewhere making those kind of links, and like, even God's upset with me. The smoke's not going up.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I mean, how many hits? Like, I didn't get any of the Facebook likes.
Oh yeah.
So it's like, I suck at this. I'm done.
Right. Yeah. Oh man, for sure. When it comes to social media, people that's a pandemic of its own.
The smoke isn't going up.
Right. Yeah. The likes and the comments are down, and I've had the conversation. There's a network that I'm a part of pastors, and we had a online Zoom call. This is a few weeks ago, and we were talking about, as we're doing our Sunday morning broadcasts, or any of our broadcasts for that matter, whether it be a prayer meeting or whatever, we're watching the little number of likes and views that is happening live. And I had some of my friends around the country. There's a pastor friend of mine in New York. He's like, man, I just got to get a Post-it note and cover that part of the screen, because it just messes with me when maybe my wife comes on to pray and the number starts going up, and then I start talking and the number starts going down. And of course we were joking about it, but he was also kind of like telling on himself a little bit of like, hey, I need to not be so really caught up with that,
Yeah, I have to say, in ministry, in some ways, the more I prepared and really, watch my personal devotional life, my study, I continued through the years to care about the content I was giving, to make sure that I was really feeding people. I think the more I did that, the worse reactions I got in the congregation. The days that I didn't, that I was upset, my My prayer life wasn't good. I hadn't studied, and I just got to the pulpit and just, told a few funny stories, read a scripture. Those were the days that the numbers were up, and the reactions were good. And
Doesn't that just frustrate you?
yeah, no, I think it's, I just think that we have to realize that an awful lot of the people do not come to church to really hear any kind of teaching that will dig into their lives. And we have to find some ways of knowing, even if they don't, they may tomorrow or 5 months from now. So we've got to both give the content we can and also massage kind of the folks that may not be there to get the most serious stuff, but they haven't quite made up their mind if they're going to follow the Lord or not. There's
Yeah,
no
it's a
sense
wide-
of
it's a
chasing
wide
away.
audience.
Yeah, it's a wide audience. That's
Yeah.
what you're saying. Exactly right. And if we judge ourselves on either pole of that, we just have to be faithful to God and do our best to hear genuine critique from people we know love us that are trying to help us.
We go down these great rabbit trails. I love it. It's great. We're not even going off of any notes here, but I did want to bring you on again to talk about that PTSD issue and just being aware of that this is something to expect. Not to, like some people, well, I'm not believing for that. That's not where my faith level is. I'm not going to be dealing with that. Mm-hmm. Okay, well, clap my hands. I'm so glad for you. It's naive of us and unwise of us to not, or to deny that this may be coming down the road.
You want me to tell what PTSD is?
Yeah, please do. And then I love the illustrations some of the illustrations that you gave, like, the hand cut off
Yeah.
or whatever. And then if you can maybe share with us also, like, how can we navigate through, first of all, it's an awareness issue, but then, like, what can we do? What are the steps that we
Yeah.
can do to move forward?
Okay, the illustration I used the other night on Facebook Live was, let's say a guy's working out in a field by himself and he's working with equipment in the field, and he reaches down to get some grass out of whatever, and a blade cuts his hand off. You think, oh, he's going to scream, and mostly not. Most of the time, somebody's going to look like, oh my God, I've cut off my hand. He's going to reach down with his other hand and pick the hand up. And if he has a jacket or something, he's going to put the hand in there. He's going to get his belt off and try to cut the flow of the blood, at least cut it off, or to cut it way down. And then he's going to walk to get help. If he can get to his car, he might drive himself to a hospital. That's possible. But in the scenario I said, he goes to a farmhouse that's within walking distance, and somebody comes to the door and he's like, I've cut off my hand, I need medical help. And he may just say, you have a beautiful home. That's possible. He may say, I can't believe I've cut off my hand. He may be talking like that until the ambulance gets there, and he might even make a quip about, I hope you turn on the siren, I've always wanted to run. And anything's possible, but probably when he realizes I'm safe, I'm in the hands of people that can help me, he's going to go unconscious or nearly so. And the next day or a few hours from there, whatever, he may wake up and, here, we got your hand reattached, or we weren't able to save the hand, whatever he hears. And only in the day or two following that, suddenly the feelings come out, and he's either angry, sad, hysterical, whatever. They'll have to sedate him. And then he has to deal with the grief of losing a body part. That's what PTSD, post-traumatic stress. So you don't feel the stress in the moment, you feel it post.
Right.
It's afterwards. And this happens with pastors. We go back to pastors, is like when you're going through a crisis. Many pastors, that's certainly the way I'm wired. You can go claim a body. You can walk someone through some really horrendous stuff. I've gone to where suicides have occurred, all those kinds of things. And in the moment, you're just talking to the officers. You're just, you're doing your professional thing. What I did not realize is in my early days and many of my days in ministry, I would just keep on the schedule that I had had before because that's over now. But now you're mad at people, you're sad, you're suddenly tempted to do things you didn't even know that you were worried about. It was a problem for you. It's post-traumatic. Let's take a pilot. Say pilot's in the plane, and you're back in the back, and then he has engine trouble, and he knows it. He goes through his checklist. He doesn't come on the intercom and say, "Oh my God, people! I don't know what we're going. I'm going to try, but what you want to hear from the pilot? Say, ladies and gentlemen, we have a few technical difficulties. Just to be safe, we're going to go ahead and we're going to make a surprise landing here in Dallas, and just hang on. We should. We'll if we either get repaired or we get you on another plane or whatever." And you're like, people are apprehensive a little bit. The pilot may not feel it. He's just going through his checklist. But when he gets to the ground, he may want to get drunk. He may want to go to a strip joint. I don't know. Depending on how he's wired, some way he's got to deal with that post-traumatic stress. And so as we've gone through the pandemic, we've heard stuff either we believe or don't believe, hundreds of thousands of people are going to die. We believed it or didn't believe it, but either way, it's lodged.
Right.
Either we're mad because they said it, or we're mad because people aren't accepting it. We're mad because people are social distancing. We're mad because they won't, and we're afraid. And so this creates enormous stress because it's in our families, it's in our communities. Some people want to wear masks, some people don't. As we come out of this, and even things may seem fairly normal, we're not going to be normal inside. We're going to have to find ways of dealing with it. I didn't mean to go through that long of an explanation.
No, that's okay.
That's
Yes.
post-traumatic
So a
stress.
question then, it sounds like most of the things that people do are destructive to deal with it. What's the right way
Thank
to,
you.
to respond to that?
Well, as a Christian, and I'm not just like panacea here, but fervent prayer is therapeutic. And by fervent prayer, I mean, if you have emotions, find a place where you can express yourself emotionally to God. And there's many traditions in Christian faith. Spirituality in Christianity tends to be either ecstatic or contemplative. Ecstatic meaning you really express yourself over the top, or contemplative, you meditate and take that in. Those all have their place. But this is a time where most of us are probably going to need some ecstatic ways of expressing ourselves to God. And we also need the contemplative to where, to meditating on the goodness of God and so forth, and calming ourselves and all that. And what's best for you might vary from day to day. The worst thing you can do is to just go through the motions and not just think that I'm going to re-enter my life the way it was. So prayer works. Safe relationships to where you say to a person, "I'm not doing well. My thoughts are not," because some people are going to notice one day that their thoughts are not coming together. And if they're older, they're going to think, "I have Alzheimer's." I can't. One of my keys, and I can't remember that person's name. I've known him for. It didn't come. The name didn't come. I got kind of lost here. It's very unlikely that you developed Alzheimer's in 2 months. It's likely that you've come out of some trauma, and you have to give yourself some time to process it.
So just to follow up on that, so like let's say that, because I'm not real good with contemplative. So if I try to get together, I'm dealing with a lot of stress. Let's say I try to get together and I try to find a quiet place, and I just can't. Mm-hmm. Is that a sign that I need to do something more exuberant?
Perhaps.
So to speak? I mean, is that
You might need to run.
Oh,
I was
okay.
talking about
Other
prayer.
than running.
Do what? So you're not into running?
Could you tell? How about taco eating? We can go do that.
Yeah.
We can get our jaw working.
Well, actually, yeah. I mean, a lot of people will eat.
That is what I do. So, that's
But
how I-
well, one thing it might be, here's a contemplative practice. You cook and you make a meal and you have some friends and you cook something you hadn't cooked before and you laugh if you mess it up, or if it's good, you say, wow, this is really good. You do something that, being contemplative doesn't just mean you take a passage of scripture and you meditate on that and you go through all these, prayer steps. For some people, it's really great. Sometimes that's good for me, sometimes not. But cooking or playing a musical instrument, just sitting and just enjoying playing.
So one of the things that I've done just to manage stress, and you can tell me if this fits, is that sometimes I used to work late for like a decade. I worked late. I got off at like 11, so I'd get home at 11:30 or something's quiet. I'd have a lot going on in my brain, and so what I would do is I would play video games. It would be like I'm focused on the strategy of what I'm doing, and it would just cause everything else to go away. Is that healthy or unhealthy?
It depends. For me, and I like video gaming too, if I do it before I go to sleep, I'm not going to be sleeping. Because what's happening is there's parts of your brain that's interacting like that, all that's real. And so all the sounds and the movement and so forth, for a lot of people, would be they're wired up now and they can't rest. Or if they enter sleep, they don't enter the deepest kind of sleep. And so you just have to know how you're wired. I'm a morning person, not a night person, so I can take on things that are very active in mid-morning and do well with them that I can't do in the evening because I'm winding down. So all these things we have to take in consideration and know ourselves and how we're wired. If I prescribe something for you that works for me, it might take you in the opposite direction. I don't know that. So we have to talk in general like this and say, maybe this, maybe that, maybe the other. But one thing for sure, for a while, your life is out of kilter and it's going to have to find its way to the new norm. And to find its way to the new norm, you're going to have to try some things out.
So the people that are working through the stress that's coming and that's been building up for the last couple months, is the goal to work through those emotions, or is the goal to be able to manage the emotions so they don't come out? Meaning like
Both.
Both. Okay.
Yeah, like if I'm going to go to the workplace, like let's say, let's use that example of a pilot again, and I'm all wired up. Well, I don't need to do loop-de-loops in the air because I got to work out my stuff. And that's an analogy that we could do in business too. So there's a safe place to do that, and not. And really, it's like grief. When somebody's grieving, now they're ready to go back to work, kind of, but they're still grieving a loss. It's okay that every once in a while they have to remove themselves and go and cry in a bathroom or something. But if they're breaking down during the whole day, then they're not ready to be at work. Most people can unpack it in bits and pieces. So that maybe for months there's some of that going on, but most people don't see it. Only when we're in safe places. But we can do normal things and normal routine, but we know we're kind of play acting, and there's some part of us that's not yet ready. And you just have to work it out and figure it out for yourself.
So awareness. Being
Awareness,
aware that this is what's impacting you.
Yeah.
I find myself with unreasonable thoughts, unreasonable anger, frustration, confusion, things like that. You're like, where is this coming from? Just be aware that this is something that's impacting you. Maybe you didn't even know it.
Here's the deal, Kate. You say, like, you've been pretty well locked down in your house. You've seen a few people. Most people are kind of like semi-quarantined, so
Sure.
Some people will.
Side note, I just saw the other day that Tennessee got a rating of an F on social distancing.
That's because people in Tennessee are not going to have anybody tell them what to do no matter what. They should have said, "I want everybody to go out and just pack the malls." And
Then they would have got the result. They
yeah,
wanted.
yeah, because
First time I've heard a psychologist say reverse psychology word. I always thought that was just a
Just in
joke.
Tennessee,
Just in
just
Tennessee.
or in the South.
yeah, just that's right. So what was I saying before?
What were we? We were. We'll get there. What was that?
Yeah.
No. It was good.
We'll edit this part.
What did you just?
No, that's okay. People probably like that part
We
the
had
best.
talked about awareness. Then you had said, "Oh God."
Yeah.
Okay.
You have to, we were talking about we have to becoming aware of oneself. That's and
think we
how one is wired. We were talking
Yeah,
about
we
that.
had talked about that. Well, here, let me ask you this question because
I think we're experiencing post-traumatic stress disorder
right now.
right
This,
now.
Is, this is how we're working it out. Anyways, we had to stop our actual podcast with Pastor Bishop Dan, which you'll hear about.
Dr.
Pastor, Counselor Emeritus of something, I don't know. But it ended up going really long, so we're going to cut it into two. So this is the exit for the first one.
Yes. So if you were watching it and going, oh, what in the world
Where did
happened?
he-
They were in the
where
middle of
did he
this
go?
really
Yeah.
in-depth conversation that I was really enjoying.
We
and all
cut
of
it
a
off in
sudden,
the middle of a sentence. I
Yes.
mean, because that was a riveting conversation. And the second
great.
part is even more. We're going to talk about charity and continuing to talk about what to do with the stresses and the pressures and being
Yeah.
kind to each other. It's really good. Very stimulating conversation. I mean that seriously.
this is our first podcast in person.
Yeah, that's
with
right.
one another.
That's right. So now that we're allowed to kind of relax the rules, we did have it. So Pastor Dan was here today, and so instead of trying to do a three-way Zoom, that's all right. Hey, wash your hands.
Washing my hands. What you're supposed to be doing.
That's what you did. The more you know. Can you get the little star that goes, or maybe this way?
You know, it was interesting. I don't know if this was in part one that you just watched or if it's going to be in part two, but Pastor Dan said that he did have level 3 anxiety, level 3 out of 10.
3 out of 10. So just like this
Anxiety,
moderate,
sitting
this
so
minor
close to
moderate.
me.
I mean, it's there. It's always there. I mean, it's really apparent when you go to a store. Like you'll see people will just like go way away from you, and sometimes you'll want to go way away from them. Depends on what they're wearing. If they've got a big mask on and they're wearing plastic bags, you're like, it's not going to get me.
Or some people who have complete disregard or for whatever reason, and they just walk right up next to you.
Yeah.
So
If they're just like rubbing their nose and then rolling with the cart,
I
just
heard-
them going around you.
I heard that you had a experience recently at a gas station.
Oh man, I went to Buc-ee's.
What's Buc-ee's?
Buc-ee's is like the giantest, that's a new word, gas station / Walmart in the world. And they're, it's just, in the best of times, you can go in there and get all your shopping done. I mean, you can get groceries, you can get snacks, you can get food. One time I went in one and I actually counted because you go to the restroom, because it's a gas station, right? You're usually driving somewhere. And go to the gas station. In the restroom, I would guess that the men's restroom was as big as this whole house. The downstairs of the house.
The
I
down.
mean-
So what we're talking about?
3,000 square feet.
So we're talking about
not upstairs too, but I mean
Yeah.
we're talking about like 30 stalls. It's just ridiculous, and every stall has a hand sanitizer.
1,500 square feet for a men's restroom.
It was crazy,
Women's is probably bigger than that.
right? You probably got couches and stuff. I mean, like recliners and like a seating area. Maybe someone standing
Nail
there
salon.
with hot towels. Boys just get stalls, but at least I mean it's just a crazy big place. And when we went there, I went there and it's and this is during the current situation we're in where it's kind of like people are going out again. There must have been hundreds of people there. It was freaking me out. I did not like that. So I'll find myself in the I'm still gonna kind of be.
How
not
many of
too
them were
close.
wearing masks?
Nobody. Like 4 people were wearing masks, and it was the older people, and basically exclusively. And it was just even now that I go out on the streets are busy again, which sucks. I mean, traffic not being there was great.
Right. That's
I
the
mean-
worst thing about getting back to normal life. Is
Yeah,
the
just
traffic.
The traffic. I mean, yeah, and then that's obviously that's flippant, but it's true. I mean, you can tell how many people are out because of the traffic.
Yeah.
Especially in Murfreesboro downtown.
This is definitely the end of the podcast because my wife is
rambling.
in the kitchen next to us,
Is she making any
and
food?
she's just
She's 6 feet
chopping
away.
broccoli over there.
Sorry.
Broccoli?
Anyway, Well, that's another joke. Goes back to way like SNL days back when Dana Carvey was on.
They chopped pork.
Well, he was
Chopped-
made this song about chopping broccoli.
Oh, I
You
don't know
remember
that one.
that?
No,
Okay.
but then again, I didn't know
You
about the
can
cowbells
Google it.
until you. That's right. You're the one that told me about the cowbells video.
Oh, man.
He made that joke. He made this joke about how he's got a fever, and I was just like, "What are you even talking about? I don't get it." And then he showed me, and yeah, now I know. So now
Christopher
I'm cool.
Walken.
I'm cool. I missed that somehow.
I'm Bruce Dickinson, baby.
Yeah, now I know. Stupid cowbell thing. And you hear that joke all the time now. And I don't know how I went through life until a year ago and never heard anything about it, or probably just
But
didn't know what people
you
were
just
talking
went
about.
right over your
I'm
head.
like, why do you want
Yeah.
cowbells? That's
But now
stupid.
you're on the inside with the rest of the millions of us that know
Yeah,
that joke.
everybody else. I'm in there. Yeah. Anyways,
All right,
do we have
so
anything to wrap to talk about?
just more things that are super serious, but I'm kind of like,
Yeah, I mean, I'm tired it out. I did go. We'll have to have another podcast at some point. Not make our 7 listeners wait another month.
right, and your mom.
And my mom, she's one of the 7.
Oh, okay.
My grandma too.
Yeah.
My grandma and my mom, that's 2. And our wives that are forced to listen to
We
it.
do force them to listen, and
That's 4.
But they also help us edit things out.
Right. They're going to take out all of the funny jokes.
Well, thanks for watching. The Everyone Else Has a Podcast, and maybe someday you'll have a podcast too.
I'm sure you will.